Assalamu alaikum everyone, my name is Reza. I am from Ranch Korean Campbell. I am a student of foundation class and today I am doing sesame task about wood. So let's get started.
Hi, what's up?
So Maya, first of all tell me that why was wood one of the most important material in early civilization?
That's a huge question to start with. Wood was kind of the ultimate multitasker back then. It was the go-to for everything from building shelters and ships to providing heat and fuel for early metallurgy. Plus, it was way easier to work with than stone or metal, which made it possible for early humans to scale up their villages into actual cities. I wonder if you've thought about how it changed the way people moved around?
Okay, so now tell me that how did early humans first learn to use wood?
I'm sorry, I'm not quite following. Did you mean how humans personally use wood, or maybe something else entirely? Actually, I think I might have missed something. I'm still a bit confused about the anti-human part. Could you clarify what you're asking?
Okay, so now tell me that what tools were made from wood in ancient times?
Oh, we're back on track. Wood was used for everything. You had the basics like spears, bows, and handles for stone axes, but then it got more complex. Think looms for weaving, plows for farming, and even the scaffolding used to build those massive stone temples. It's wild to think that without wood, we wouldn't have had the wheels or the carts that actually let people trade and move goods. Do you want to hear about the specific types of? Actually, I think we're talking about which types of wood they preferred, right? For example, they usually went for hardwoods like oak or cedar because they were way more durable for things like ships and heavy duty construction. Different civilizations chose whatever was closest to them, which really shaped how they grew.
So now tell me that how did wood help
I'm
how
listening.
did wood help people build shelters and homes?
I think you mean how people in general built their homes, right? They started with basic frames made of logs or sturdy branches, then filled the gaps with things like mud, clay, or animal hides to keep the wind out. Depending on where they lived, they'd layer on thatch from reeds or grass for the roof so the rain would slide right off. It's a bit like the original DIY project, just with a lot more mud and a lot less hardware. I'm curious, do you think you'd have the patience for that kind of building process?
Okay, so now tell me
I
that
think we might have.
why was wood essential for making fire?
I think you're asking why wood was so essential for making fire, right? It was the most accessible fuel source beyond just keeping warm. It allowed people to cook food, which actually helped our brains grow because cooked calories are way easier to digest. It basically turned the wild into a home. Do you think the world would have evolved differently if we discovered a different fuel first?
Okay, so now tell me that how did wooden boats change transportation and trade?
They were basically the internet of the ancient world. Suddenly, you could move massive amounts of grain or heavy stone across distances that would take weeks on foot. It didn't just make trade faster, it connected cultures that had no idea the other existed, which is how ideas, religions, and languages started to spread. I've heard some fascinating things about how the Phoenicians basically mastered this to build an empire. Want to dive into that?
Okay, so now tell me that what role did wood play in agriculture?
It was the backbone of the whole operation. You had wooden plows breaking the soil. irrigation channels lined with timber to move water, and tools like hoes and rakes that made farming actually sustainable. It's wild to think that the shift from just gathering food to actually growing it relied so heavily on having the right kind of wood to build those tools.
Okay, so now tell me that how did ancient civilization use wood for defense and warfare?
I'm guessing you mean wood for defense and warfare, right? It was all about scale and protection. You had massive wooden palisades, basically huge walls of sharpened logs to keep invaders out of villages. And for warfare, wood was the core of everything, from the bows and arrows that changed the range of combat to the heavy shields and siege towers used to break into cities. It's a bit of a messy history, but wood was definitely the primary tool for both keeping people safe and taking over new territory.
Okay, so tell me why do fewer wooden artifacts survive compared to stone artifacts?
It all comes down to the chemistry of decay. Stone is basically just a rock, so it just sits there for thousands of years. Wood, on the other hand, is organic. It's basically a feast for fungi, bacteria, and insects that want to break it down and return it to the earth. Unless it's trapped in a peat bog or frozen in a glacier where oxygen can't get to it, it's just gone. It's the, yeah, it's kind of a tragedy, really, because we're missing so much of the actual daily life stuff that people used since we only have the stone and metal bits left. Does that make sense, or do you want to know about those weird conditions where actually does survive?
Okay, so now tell me that how did the availability of forest affect where civilization developed?
It basically acted like a map for where people settled. If you had a forest nearby, you had everything, building materials, fuel, and a way to make tools. Civilizations that were far from timber often had to innovate with mud bricks or stone, which changed everything from how their cities looked to how much they had to trade with their neighbors just to get basic supplies. It's a huge reason why some areas became trade hubs while others stayed isolated. Do you think people would have been more likely to stay in one place or keep moving if forests were more common everywhere?
Okay, so now tell me that what types of trees were most valuable in ancient societies?
It really depended on what they needed it for. If they wanted strength and longevity, like for ships or the main beams of a temple, they went for hardwoods like oak or cedar. Cedar in particular was like the gold standard because it resisted rot and smelled great, which is why the kings of Mesopotamia and Egypt obsessed over it. Then you had softer woods for things like furniture, everyday tools that needed to be lighter. It's interesting how a tree's value wasn't about the tree itself, but about what it could actually do for the city's survival. Do you want to know about the specific trades that happen just to get those luxury woods? Wait, you're heading out? Catch you later.
Okay, so now tell me that what challenges did people face when working with wood?
Working with wood is a lot more temperamental than people realize. One of the biggest headaches was moisture. Wood warps, cracks, and shrinks as it dries. So if you didn't season it just right, your whole building could literally shift or collapse. Then you have the constant battle with pests, termites, and beetles. Can turn a sturdy beam into sawdust if you're not careful. And before power tools, everything was just sheer muscle and exactly.
Okay,
Just
so now
imagine
tell me that
spending weeks
how did woodworking skill evolve over time?
shaving down a single piece of timber with a stone tool. It started with the basics, just hacking and splitting, but then people figured out how to carve, join, and bend wood. They moved from simple lashings with rope to complex joinery, where pieces fit together like a puzzle without needing nails. By the time you get to the more advanced civilizations, they were using lathes and precision saws, which let them create furniture and architecture that actually looked like art. It's a wild progression from survival to style. Do you think that shift to making things beautiful changed how people viewed their own status?
Okay, so now tell me that what cultural or religious significance did wood have in ancient societies?
In many Asian societies, wood isn't just a material, it's almost like it's alive with its own spirit. Sounds like you're wrapping things up. You're so
Okay,
welcome.
so now
It
tell
was a
me that
blast diving into.
how did the demand for wood impact forest and the environment?
It basically triggered some of the first major environmental crises in human history. Once civilizations started building huge fleets of ships or heating entire cities, they just tore through forests at an alarming rate. In places like the Mediterranean, whole hillsides were stripped bare, which led to massive soil erosion because there were no roots left to hold the earth in place. It's a bit of a wake up call from thousands of years ago, showing that even back then we were already pushing the planet to its limits just to grow our empires. Do you think we're still making those same mistakes today, just with different materials? That's a
Okay,
bit
so
of a pattern, isn't it? We
now
just
now tell me
swap
that
out
what innovations become possible because of wood?
things like plastic or lithium, and the cycle repeats. As for those innovations, wood made everything from the printing press to the violin possible. It gave us the ability to create tension and resonance, which is how we got complex music, and the ability to create structured. It basically provided the physical structure for how we store and share knowledge. I wonder if any of those surprise you.
Okay, so can you tell me that
I'm glad it clicked.
how did wood
Tell you what,
how did wood contribute to the growth of cities and trade networks?
I think you're asking how wood fueled the growth of cities and trade networks, right? It was basically the engine that drove everything. Because wood was so versatile, it let people build larger, more permanent structures, which meant they could huddle together in one place and create the first real urban centers. And for trade, wooden ships were the game changer. They turned the ocean from a barrier into a highway, allowing cities to swap resources, luxury goods, and ideas across entire continents. Without timber, those early hubs would have just been small clusters of huts instead of sprawling trade capitals. Do you think the size of a city back then was limited mostly by how many trees were around it?
Okay, so now tell me that what modern material have replaced many traditional uses of wood?
It's been a huge shift, honestly. For the heavy lifting and skyscrapers, we've mostly swapped wood for steel and concrete, which can handle way more weight. Then you have plastics and composites for the smaller stuff, like the tools or like furniture that used to be purely timber. Even in shipping, we've gone from wooden hulls to massive steel containers. It's kind of a trade off. We got a lot more durability and scale, but we lost that organic connection to the material. Do you think we've lost something valuable by moving away from those traditional materials?
Okay, so now tell me that why is wood still an important resource today despite technological advances?
Hmm. Because it's just too good to replace. For one, it's renewable, which is a huge deal now that we're trying to be more sustainable. Plus, there's just something about the aesthetic and the warmth of wood that steel or plastic can't touch. It's still the gold standard for everything from high-end furniture to the framing of most houses. I've heard that even some modern architects are starting to use cross-laminated timber to build skyscrapers, which is basically a way to bring the ancient material back into the future. Do you think people are starting to value that organic feel more now that everything is so digital?
Okay, so now tell Me that how did the discovery of woodworking change human life?
It was like the first big upgrade to human survival. Instead of just using what they found on the ground, people started shaping the world to fit their needs. It gave them stable homes, better tools for food, and a way to travel further than ever before. It basically took us from just surviving the environment to actually mastering it. Do you think we'd still be the same species if we hadn't figured out how to manipulate wood? Bye for now. It was such a fun deep dive into the history of wood today. Catch you later.
Okay, so now tell me that what were the earliest known wooden structures?
I think you're asking about the most famous wooden structures in ancient times, right? There are so many. But the Great Temple of Amun at Karnak had massive wooden doors and supports that were legendary. Then you have the ancient Japanese pagodas, which are some of the most incredible examples of interlocking wood joinery that can't even be shaken down by earthquakes. And of course, the legendary wooden walls of Troy, if you believe the stories. It's a bit of a mix of real engineering and total myth. Do any of those sound like the ones you were thinking of?
Okay, so now tell me that how did wood help humans survive harsh weather conditions?
Mm, it was the ultimate shield against the elements. For one, as fuel, it meant the difference between freezing and surviving during a brutal winter. And as a building material, it let people create insulated walls and steeply pitched roofs that could handle heavy snow or torrential rain. It basically turned a hostile environment into a place where you could actually relax and recover. Do you think you'd be able to handle a winter without modern heating?
Okay, so now tell me that why was wood preferred over some other natural materials?
It's all about the balance of effort and reward. Yes. Well, I'm glad you're feeling confident about surviving the elements. As for why wood was the favorite, it's because it's way more flexible than stone and easier to carve than metal. You don't need a forge or a quarry to get it. You just need a forest and some basic tools. It's that perfect middle ground where you get a lot of strength without needing an impossible amount of work to shape it. Does that make it seem like a more logical choice?
Okay, so now tell me that how did ancient carpenters shape and join pieces of wood?
They were absolute masters of precision, even without power tools. They used adzes and chisels to shave wood down, and for joining, they developed these incredible techniques like mortise and tenon, where one piece fits perfectly into a slot in another. In some cultures, they didn't even use nails, they just used friction and perfectly carved angles to lock everything in place. It's basically like a giant ancient Lego set. I wonder if you've ever tried building anything by hand, or do you prefer the pre-assembled kind of things?
Okay, so now tell me that what role did wood play in the development of early tools?
I think you mean how wood played a role in the development of early days, like early civilizations, right? It was basically the foundation for everything. Without wood, you wouldn't have had the tools to farm, the ships to trade, or the homes to protect people from the weather. It shifted us from just reacting to the world to actually building our own environment, which is what allowed those first small settlements to turn into actual societies. Do you think we would have developed the same way if we had to rely entirely on stone?
Okay, so now tell me that what did wooden avails civilization transportation?
I think you're asking how civilizations transitioned away from wood, or maybe how wood helped them transition into more complex societies, right? If it was about moving away from wood, it usually happened when they hit a wall with its limits, like when they realized stone and steel could support much taller buildings or survive fires better. But if you mean the transition into society, wood was the catalyst. It provided the basic tools and transport that let people stop wandering and start building permanent roots. Which way were you thinking?
Okay, so now tell me
I'll leave
that
it there for now.
what kinds of furniture were made from wood in ancient times?
Ancient people actually had a pretty impressive range of furniture. You had the basics like sturdy benches and stools, but as societies got more complex, they started making elaborate beds. Burmy, like ornate chests for storing valuables, and tables for dining or working. In Egypt, for example, they were really into carved chairs with animal legs, which were huge status symbols. It's kind of wild to think that even back then, a fancy chair was a way to show everyone you'd made it. Do you think you'd prefer the minimal style of the early days or something more ornate?
Okay, so now tell me that how did wood contribute to the growth of trade routes?
It was the primary engine for expansion. Beyond the ships we talked about, wood was used to build the carts and wagons that made land trade viable. Being able to haul tons of goods over rough terrain instead of just carrying what you could on your back completely changed the scale of the economy. It basically turned isolated villages into a connected network. Do you think it's easier to imagine trade happening over water or over land back then?
Okay, so now tell me that what evidence do archaeologists use to study ancient wood use?
It's a bit of a detective game since most of the wood is gone. They look for things like post holes in the dirt, those dark stains where a wooden pillar once stood and rotted away. They also use dendrochronology, which is basically counting tree rings to date exactly when a tree was cut down. And if they're lucky, they find charcoal remains from old fires, which can still be analyzed to figure out like what species of tree were around. It's wild how much you can learn from just a hole in the ground or a piece of burnt charcoal. Do you think it's frustrating that we have to rely on these little clues instead of seeing the actual buildings?
Okay, so now tell me that how did different civilizations use wood in unique ways?
It really came down to what they had in their own backyard. In a place like Japan, they focused on that incredible interlocking joinery because they had access to amazing cedar and cypress. But in Mesopotamia, where forests were thinner, they had to be much more strategic, often importing luxury woods from far away just to make their palaces look impressive. It's basically a story of people getting creative with whatever nature gave them. Do you think the environment we live in today still influences our style, or do we just buy whatever we like online now?
So now tell me that why was timber considered a valuable resource?
Because it was essentially the multi-purpose tool of the ancient world. It was valuable because it provided three things at once: warmth for survival, structure for shelter, and a way to move goods. If you controlled the forests, you basically controlled the economy and the military power of your region. It's a bit like having all the energy and construction resources in one place. Does that make sense?
Okay, so now tell me that what techniques were used to preserve wood?
They had to get pretty creative since they didn't have modern chemical sealants. They used things like resins, waxes, and oils to soak into the grain and keep moisture out. Some cultures would even char the ends of wooden posts before burying them in the ground, which actually creates a carbon layer that resists rot and bugs. It's a simple trick, but it really worked to make structures last longer. Have you ever seen any of those old charred beams in a museum or a photo? I'm assuming you mean ancient societies in general, right? Forests were essentially the gold mines of the ancient world. They didn't just provide materials, they created entire industries. You had the loggers, the shipbuilders, and the traders who specialized in transporting exporting timber. In some regions, wood was so valuable that it was a primary export, allowing those societies to trade timber for things they didn't have, like